Impacts of sheep grazing are not the same everywhere. Remember that environmental conditions determine how sheep grazing affects the ecosystem. In terms of climate, geology, and biodiversity, Iceland is unique, and these influences on sheep grazing have been studied for many years. To talk a bit more about this, here is Ingibjörg Svala Jónsdóttir, professor at the University of Iceland.
Iceland is truly a land of fire and ice. The landscapes we see today have been shaped by a combination of factors that have made the country quite unique. Volcanic activity, glaciers, harsh climate, and later human activities such as woodcutting and sheep grazing. Iceland is an island in the North Atlantic Ocean, roughly 100,000 square kilometers. That is a little bit larger than Ireland, but less than 340,000 people live there. The population density of Iceland is comparable to Australia. The majority of the population is concentrated in the southwest part of the country. The capital city, Reykjavik, is situated in this area. The rest of the population, however, lives in towns or isolated farms in the lowland areas relatively close to the coast. The interior of the island, about 75% of the land area, is comprised by high elevation plateau, the highlands. These areas are dominated by treeless heathlands and wetlands, much like the tundra ecosystems we find further north in the Arctic. As well, there are extensive, sparsely vegetated deserts in the highlands. Some of them are naturally formed by the volcanic activity, but others are consequences of human activities. Iceland lies just south of the Arctic Circle, but it has relatively milder winters than other places at the same latitude, thanks to the North Atlantic current that brings warmer waters from lower latitudes. Actually, the average temperatures of the coldest month of the year range between -2.3 and -0.4 degrees in the lowlands. Summers are relatively cool, with average temperatures the warmest month ranging between 7.6 and 12 degrees. Iceland is a rather windy place, which can be explained both by its position within the polar cell of the global circulation and by a large semi-permanent low-pressure center between Iceland and South Greenland called the Icelandic Low. Iceland is well known by its volcanism. Iceland lies on the divergent boundary between the Eurasian and the North American continental plates, the Mid-Atlantic Ocean ridge, and above a hot spot called the Icelandic plume. The consequences are repeated volcanic eruptions and high geothermal activity. Most of the active volcanoes are concentrated within what is called the volcanic active zone. This area is geologically young, so its soils are less well developed, and it is generally less well vegetated than elsewhere. The volcanic nature of the island also makes its soils quite special. Soils of volcanic origin are called andosols. They are rich in nutrients, but they lack cohesion. Whenever they are exposed to wind and water, they are very vulnerable to erosion. Glaciers have played a major role in shaping both landscapes and biodiversity in Iceland. During the Pleistocene, an ice sheet repeatedly covered land areas and retreated again. The glaciers carved the land masses and formed valleys and fjords, disrupted the terrestrial ecosystems, and contracted the areas where plants and animals could survive, wiping out most of the biota. It is about 10,000 years since the end of the Ice Age, and today glaciers cover about 11% of the land area in Iceland. Being a young island that has been repeatedly glaciated, Iceland has a relatively low biodiversity. For example, there are no native mammalian herbivores. The two species of large herbivores we have nowadays in Iceland, sheep and reindeer, are both introduced species. Sheep were introduced as livestock by the Norse settlers in the 9th century. Reindeer were introduced from Norway in the 1700s and are now restricted to some parts of East Iceland. In contrast to other terrestrial systems at high latitudes, Iceland has no small mammalian herbivores like lemmings or wolves, with the exception of the introduced wood mouse in lowland areas. The only native herbivores in Iceland are birds, including ptarmigan and migratory geese, and invertebrates.
So, to summarize, in Iceland, the effects of grazing are compounded by climatic conditions and the geological forces that have shaped the island. First, northern climates imply that growing seasons are short, so vegetation does not have much time to develop. This is particularly true for sites at higher elevations, like the highlands, and it is actually in the highlands where most of the extensive grazing commons are located. Second, the volcanic origin of Icelandic soils means that they are very sensitive to erosion, especially within the volcanic active zone. Further, volcanic activity and ash deposition can further suffocate and kill vegetation, opening more patches of bare ground. All these conditions together have led to the association of sheep grazing and extensive soil erosion in Iceland. In the next section, we will talk about soil erosion in Iceland, which still today represents one of the main environmental problems in the country.